Have you ever imagined what happens to someone who returns home, but doesn't return to themselves? This is the story of a soldier who, even standing, felt like he was a leftover from his own world. A man whose eyes bore the marks of battles no one saw, of wars no one told of wounds no bandage could heal. And perhaps as you listen to this, some part of you recognizes this feeling of being present, but not whole. Have you ever experienced this? The truth is, war doesn't always end when the shooting stops. Sometimes it continues within the mind, in the deepest silences, and in the early hours when the past insists on returning. And what you're about to discover may surprise you, because this story isn't just about pain. It's about resurrection, about someone who walked among inner ruins and yet still carried, hidden, a thread of hope. Even if he himself didn't realize it. The soldier in this story felt like a stranger in his own life. Those around him celebrated his return, but inside he had the bitter feeling that the best part of himself had remained on the battlefield. His days were marked by a heavy silence, a kind of emptiness that tightened his chest without asking permission. It was like walking in a world shrouded in shadows, where every unexpected noise, every scattered memory, could trigger a silent, yet devastating fear. And perhaps you, the listener, have faced moments when you felt like you were carrying a weight that no one could see. Moments when memories were stronger than the present. If that's your case, stay with me until the end, because what we're going to explore here goes beyond a simple narrative. This soldier's story represents thousands of lives transformed by pain, of people who were reborn from scratch when everything seemed lost. After the war, he tried to move on. He tried to resume his routine, to smile, to fit back into the setting of his own home. But the world had changed, or perhaps he had changed too much to fit in the same place. The little things, which had previously gone unnoticed, now seemed enormous. The sound of a door, a glass falling, a distant laugh. Everything could trigger memories he didn't want to relive. It was as if his mind were trapped in an emotional minefield, where every step had to be calculated. Still, he kept going, day after day, even without deeply understanding why he was still there, even carrying invisible scars and a constant feeling of being out of place. He was the typical soldier who had survived the war, but continued fighting another, the one that was happening inside himself. And this is where this story becomes so powerful, because it shows how life can seem like complete chaos before revealing its true meaning. Amidst this turmoil, there was something he couldn't name. An emptiness, perhaps, a silent pain, or simply the need to understand who he was now. He questioned himself constantly. How can I go on living when everything inside me seems to be falling apart? A question that resonates in the hearts of many who have lost something important, a loved one, a part of themselves, or even their own identity. But fate has unexpected ways of working. Sometimes when we believe that nothing can change, a simple presence, an unlikely visit, or a minimal gesture is capable of turning everything upside down. And it is precisely at this point that this soldier's trajectory begins to take an unexpected turn. A twist you can't imagine, but that will completely transform what you think about pain, purpose, and rebirth. And it's from here that the story really begins to unfold. Shall we continue? And while this turning point was beginning to take shape within him, something curious was also happening outside the story, perhaps within you, who are following this account. Because when we hear about someone who feels lost, broken inside, trying to put their own pieces back together, it's almost impossible not to remember some phase of our own lives. And if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Sometimes a phrase of yours can help someone else who is going through something similar and doesn't even know where to begin. It's amazing how stories like this create invisible bridges between people who have never met. And that connection matters a lot, more than you can imagine. When you comment, when you share your vision, your feelings, or even your own struggle, you not only strengthen this community, but you also help this type of message reach further. And if this has somehow touched you or sparked some reflection, I really invite you to like the video right now. It seems like something simple, But this small action makes the platform understand that this is relevant content, and it takes this story to more people who may also need to hear something like this today. And of course, if you feel that this type of storytelling is part of what you enjoy following, if you feel that this channel in some way speaks to what your heart is experiencing or has experienced, consider subscribing. That way you won't miss the next stories, and I guarantee you there's a lot of profound and transformative stuff coming up. Your subscription here is what keeps this space alive. It's what allows us to continue bringing stories that inspire, comfort, and show that even in the worst moments, there's always a way back to yourself. But let's return to our soldier. Because while all this unfolds, that unexpected visit that is about to change his destiny is already approaching, carrying with it something he never imagined he would find again. And it is precisely here, at this point where chaos and hope almost touch, that his journey begins to take on a new color, one he thought he would never be able to see again. Gradually, as we begin to look at this soldier's story with a little more depth, it becomes impossible not to imagine who he was before everything fell apart. He had a family waiting for him at his gate, simple dreams that lit up his eyes, and a personality so light that he seemed to carry the world effortlessly. He was the kind of person who laughed loudly, who found beauty in the details, and who insisted on believing that life always had something good in store just ahead. His days were filled with unpretentious conversations, plans for the future, and a constant sense of belonging. The truth is, at that time, he hadn't yet discovered the strength he possessed, because that strength only truly reveals itself when the world collapses. But it was precisely on one of those seemingly ordinary days that everything changed. The war, which until then had been just a distant headline, became real. And the instant he crossed that unknown territory, something inside him began to shatter. It's not necessary to describe violence for you to understand the unimaginable impact of a scene that completely alters the course of someone's life. Just imagine the sound that echoes inside, the feeling that the ground disappears, the exact moment when a man realizes he will never be the same again. There was a specific episode, silent and devastating, that made his heart sink. A hidden truth was revealed there, showing that war destroys much more than landscapes. It destroys certainties, perspectives, and sometimes even the very notion of self. When he finally returned home, everyone around him believed that this was the end of his suffering, but inside he knew the real battle was only beginning. He tried to sit at the table with his family, but the sound of the cutlery made him shudder. He tried to sleep in the bed that had always brought him comfort, but the dawn was now hostile territory. Nightmares came in waves, each one stealing a little more of what remained of his peace. His mind seemed trapped in the backstage of the war, reliving fragments he couldn't control. The loneliness wasn't external, it was internal, deep, almost physical, and perhaps this is where many recognize themselves, in that invisible space between wanting to move on and not being able to take the first step. Over time, he began to look in the mirror and not recognize himself. "Who am I now?" he silently asked himself every morning. The answer seemed distant, like an echo that never returned. He saw himself divided between the man he had been and the man the war had shaped, and this constant doubt corroded his mentality, his decisions, and even his capacity to feel. Little by little, the things that once gave him meaning lost their color. Food had no taste. Conversations lacked sparkle. The days seemed to drag on aimlessly. He was there, but he wasn't really there. That's when he hit rock bottom, that place where even hope falls silent. A cold, heavy moment, when everything seemed about to collapse completely. Life at that stage seemed like a blank page, but not in a liberating sense. It was a complete absence of direction. He believed that nothing could change anymore, that this was his final sentence. However, life has a curious way of surprising us precisely when we give up hope. Because on one of those gray days, an unexpected visitor knocked on the door of his destiny. It didn't matter if it was a child, an old friend, an abandoned dog, or a volunteer. The impact was the same. That presence emerged like a flash of light amidst the chaos, awakening something within him that he believed was lost. It was a simple encounter, but one that carried powerful revelations. Somehow, that visit returned a spark of purpose, something so small and so significant that it gently changed the course of his journey. From there, he did something that might seem commonplace to anyone, but for him it was an immense act. He took the first step. He sought help. He went back to training his body and mind. He tried to reconnect with people and places. He gradually rebuilt his foundation, carefully, with fragility, but also with courage. And each small victory brought him closer to something he didn't even know he could rediscover: himself. The transformation that followed wasn't magical, nor immediate. It was human, and for that very reason so powerful. He began to feel again, to see again, to exist again. The pain didn't disappear, but it gained a new meaning. And it is this rebirth, physical, emotional, and spiritual, that proves that the impossible can begin exactly where everything seemed to have ended. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about renaming one's own pain, we are talking about something much bigger than overcoming. It's about meaning, identity, and purpose. He didn't know exactly when everything started to change, but something inside him began to reorganize itself, as if the fragments of his past were finally finding space to start fitting together in a new way. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, and for sure, it wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for someone who had spent so much time fighting against his own thoughts, that was already enormous. It was in this process that he realized that transformation isn't an event. It's a choice repeated every day, even when the body aches and the mind insists on giving up. He would wake up still burdened by the weight of the memories, but now there was something different. The feeling that those memories no longer defined who he was. Before, everything seemed like a shadow that swallowed any possibility of a future. Now the shadows were still there, but there was also a discreet light shining through the cracks, announcing that something new could be born from what he had lived through. It was as if the pain had begun to reorganize itself in a more comprehensible way, almost like a hidden truth that only reveals itself when we lose everything we thought sustained us. The first decision was to ask for help, and at that moment, that simple act was worth more than any medal a soldier could receive. He found people who didn't want him to be strong all the time, who didn't demand that he smile to look good, people who listened to his pauses, respected his silences, and understood his triggers. For someone carrying the weight of his own inner abandonment, this was liberating. He began to see himself as human again, not a broken machine trying to survive his own story. Then came the training, but not the grueling physical training he knew. It was another kind of discipline, more intimate and silent, that demanded patience to rebuild what no one else saw. His breathing, his focus, his ability to be present. Each small advance brought with it a feeling of rebirth, and sometimes even a certain disbelief. He was surprised to find that he could sleep through the night, or that he could walk down the street without feeling like the world was about to collapse at any second. They seemed like small achievements, but they carried a profound impact on this new mindset that was emerging. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this whole journey was the way his body and soul began to align. He realized that when he strengthened his spirit, his body responded. When he cared for his body, his mind calmed down. It was as if all the parts of him, previously disconnected and in ruins, finally spoke to each other. He began to see meaning where before there had only been emptiness. He began to realize that the pain he felt, however bad it was, didn't have to be just a burden. It could also be the place where new roots grew strong. And of course, there were relapses. There were days when everything seemed to return to the beginning, when the triggers returned like unexpected storms. But instead of losing himself in despair, he began to recognize these moments as a natural part of his rebuilding. He understood that starting over isn't linear, and that there's no value in trying to appear invincible. True strength, after all, lies in the vulnerability of continuing, even when the past still whispers attempts to return. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something fascinating about how a human being can rename their own pain. When he finally understood that he didn't need to erase his scars, only give them new meanings, something extraordinary happened. He stopped seeing himself as someone destroyed and began to see himself as someone who survived the impossible. And this turning point changes everything. It changes his perspective. It changes his posture. It changes the way he relates to the world and the people around him. The transformation then became visible, not only in his gestures, but in the way he breathed, how he walked, how he occupied spaces. He discovered that courage lies not in facing the war outside, but the war within. He discovered that purpose doesn't disappear. Sometimes it just hides behind our falls. And he discovered, above all, that no chaos is definitive when there is someone willing to rebuild their own destiny with trembling, yet determined hands. His transformation didn't happen in a single instant, but through a series of small awakenings that accumulated silently until they formed something greater than he himself could comprehend. It was as if, after so long trying to survive his own chaos, he finally began to see beauty where before there had only been wreckage. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because he no longer saw it as an enemy. For the first time, he realized that what had hurt him was also helping to shape the man he was becoming. And this understanding, though simple, carried a profound impact. He would wake up and, instead of fearing the thoughts that might arise, he allowed himself to observe them. He no longer ran from his own mind. He had understood something that many people take a lifetime to discover. Facing is not fighting. Facing is looking. And when he began to look inward honestly, something unexpected began to happen. Those memories that were once labyrinths became maps. And it was there, in that reunion with his own shadows, that he found spaces that were still his, that were still intact, waiting to be reclaimed. A significant change occurred when he began to accept that he didn't need to be the same person he was before the war. This was perhaps the most difficult step, because the search for his old self imprisoned him. He was trying, without realizing it, to return to a place that no longer existed. But the day he understood that he didn't need to go back, that he could move forward as someone new, was the day that some of the pain lost its hold on him. He stopped chasing the past and began to build the present. And this movement, this act of letting go, opened space for a new identity to emerge. He began to reconnect with things he had abandoned: music, long conversations, the habit of watching the sunset without haste, walks without a specific destination, small rituals that once seemed unimportant, but which now had the power to remind him that life could be more than constant vigilance. He realized how simple gestures are capable of restoring entire territories within us. And this discovery rekindled in him a feeling he believed lost forever: lightness. But it wasn't just about lightness. It was also about purpose. Something inside him began to ask for more. He felt that his story could in some way touch other people who were also trying to rediscover their own strength. Perhaps it wasn't about heroism, nor about bravery in the classical sense. It was about presence, about being there whole even with cracks. He realized that his pain had taught him about empathy, about humanity, about the kind of strength that grows in silence. And it was this understanding that led him to take an even bigger step. He began helping other veterans, at first timidly, almost ashamedly, like someone who didn't yet know if they had anything valuable to offer. But little by little he realized that his story did have weight, not because it was perfect, but precisely because it wasn't. He spoke of his difficult nights, the fears he faced, the progress he made, and the relapses that still occurred. And this created a space of trust because no one there needed to pretend to be okay all the time. And it was in this process of helping that he himself began to heal in a deeper way. What he said to others also served him. Each conversation, each encounter, each shared outpouring reconstituted a part of him. He felt that he wasn't just walking, he was guiding paths. He was transforming scars into compasses. He was discovering finally what it meant to be reborn. This phase of his life had something almost poetic about it. The man who once believed himself to be in ruins was now becoming a source of strength for people who felt exactly as he once did. It's curious how life sometimes restores meaning where there was only emptiness before. As if to say gently, "This is what you needed to find." And it is at this point in his journey that everything aligns in an almost imperceptible way. The pain, the chaos, the fall, the unexpected visit, the rebirth, everything gains coherence, as if each part had been placed exactly where it should be to reveal who he was destined to become. As he progressed through this process of reconstruction, something surprising began to happen. For the first time since returning from the war, he felt he could breathe without fear of his own breath. It was as if each day brought a new fragment of lucidity, allowing him to see details that had previously been obscured by pain. The world, which for so long had seemed gray and distant, began to recover subtle, almost timid, but real colors. And these small changes transformed everything, not by size but by meaning. He began to notice that he could hear people's voices without his body automatically going on alert. He started allowing himself to walk through places he had previously avoided. He discovered that he no longer needed to control every sound around him, nor analyze every movement as if he were on a battlefield. This gradual liberation brought a new, almost strange sensation, the feeling of truly living, not just existing. But the most striking thing didn't come from small external victories. It came from within. He began to recognize emotions he had buried: shy joy, curiosity, a desire to learn again, and even that spark of enthusiasm that had always marked his personality before the war. This rediscovery was so unexpected that at many moments he was moved without understanding exactly why. It was like finding an old friend he thought he had lost. His relationship with his own history had also changed. Before, he tried to escape the memories as if they were monsters waiting in the darkness. Now he faced them with a different perspective. There was no more guilt, no more anger, nor that torturous questioning about what would have happened if he had done something differently. Instead, there was acceptance, not in the sense of agreeing with everything, but in the sense of recognizing that the past exists and that it no longer needs to hurt. This new perspective opened up space for something even greater: gratitude. Not for having suffered, but for having survived, for having found people who helped him, for having found strength in weakness, for having understood that there are battles we win when we stop fighting against ourselves. And this gratitude brought him closer to a powerful truth. He wasn't just rebuilding himself for himself. He was rebuilding himself to live relationships, to touch lives, to make his story have a real impact beyond his own experiences. It was at this point in his journey that he realized a profound change in the way he looked at the world. People ceased to be potential threats. Spaces stopped being metaphorical minefields. Life stopped being a sequence of defenses and became a territory to be explored, without haste, without unrealistic demands, without heavy masks. He was, finally, finding a balance between what he had lived and what he wished to live. And this became even more evident when he began to transform his pain into a bridge for other people. He spoke honestly, without hiding his relapses, without trying to appear like a hero. And that's precisely what touched those who listened to him. His authenticity wasn't in overcoming everything perfectly, but in admitting that the journey had been difficult, and that there were still days when it would be. He became an example not because he won everything, but because he kept walking. The most exciting part of this phase was realizing that his past, once so heavy, was now becoming part of a greater purpose. He found meaning in encounters, in conversations, in small gestures that had previously gone unnoticed. The war had marked his body, but the healing journey marked his soul, and that mark was much deeper, much brighter. By this point in his journey, something within him had already transformed in an almost invisible, yet definitive way. It was as if every step he had taken since the day he returned home had been silently preparing the ground for this moment, the instant when he would finally be able to look at his own pain without trembling, without running away, without hiding behind layers of silence. The soldier who once believed himself destroyed now walked in a new way, not because he no longer felt fear, but because he had learned to walk with it. The pain hadn't disappeared. It was still there, occupying its spaces, reminding him that part of his story was born on hard ground, full of losses and difficult memories. But for the first time, he wasn't trying to expel it. He wasn't trying to erase it. He recognized it as part of who he had become, and that, more than anything else, was the deepest sign of healing. Because when someone can look at their scars with a mixture of respect and understanding, it means they have learned to rename what once seemed unbearable. The war had taken so much from him: people, peaceful nights, the security of a predictable world. But in return, it also left him with something he only came to understand now: the sensitivity to perceive human fragility, the ability to extend a hand not only with strength, but with empathy, the skill to listen to stories he might have previously ignored, and above all, the courage to face his own vulnerabilities without feeling weak because of it. There were days when he remembered who he was before everything happened. That smiling young man full of plans with the comfortable feeling that the future was guaranteed. And for a long time, he suffered trying to recover that lost version of himself. But now he understood that he no longer needed to rebuild that man. He wasn't a return. He was an evolution. He was someone completely new, shaped by everything he had lived through, by what he had lost, by what he had overcome, and, above all, by what he had decided to continue being. This understanding led him to a kind of peace he had never experienced before. It wasn't absolute peace nor an emotional miracle that erased all trauma. It was a mature, conscious peace that accepted life's imperfections, a peace that recognized that bad days would still come, but that now he possessed the tools, people, and inner strength to face them. It was a peace born not from the absence of pain, but from understanding it. It was in this state of presence, almost serene, that he realized the true meaning of transformation. Life didn't give back what he had lost. It gave him something different. It gave him the chance to reinvent himself. It gave him the opportunity to teach other soldiers to find their own paths. It gave him a purpose that wouldn't exist without everything he had lived through. The pain ceased to be just a shadow and became a point of light. A point that guided, illuminated, and reminded him that surviving isn't just about resisting. It's about choosing to live in a more conscious way. He then found himself facing a mirror he had avoided so many times. He observed the face marked by time, the eyes that carried entire stories, and he realized something new. He liked that man. Not because he was perfect, not because he had won every battle, but because he had the courage to face himself. That image reflected there was no longer that of a soldier in ruins. It was that of someone who found strength in his own vulnerability, who transformed chaos into a path, and who renamed his own pain with wisdom. And it was in that silent, almost intimate moment that he understood a truth that would stay with him forever. Sometimes, what saves someone isn't strength. It's a simple presence. A presence that arrives at the right time, that rekindles a spark, that opens space for rebirth. A presence that can be another person, or it can be something within us that has finally awakened. As we move forward in his story, something becomes impossible to ignore. The way life, despite being harsh, incomplete, and full of cracks, still finds silent ways to invite us to move on. And for the soldier, this invitation came in the form of an understanding that took years to mature within him. He finally realized that he no longer needed to fight against who he had become. He could, for the first time, walk side by side with his own past, without carrying guilt, without carrying shame, without trying to erase the marks that time had left. It was at that point that he discovered what it really means to rename one's own pain. It's not about denying the suffering, nor pretending that nothing happened. It's about looking at what hurt and saying, "That doesn't define me anymore. That built me." It's about understanding that although the war had taken away part of his old identity, it also opened up space for a deeper, more conscious, and more sensitive version of himself. He realized there was something precious in the fact that he had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. He survived the dark nights, the silent triggers, the memories that kept returning, the unanswered questions. He survived himself. And when he recognized this, something inside him reorganized itself as if it had finally found the right place to exist. This final phase of his journey brought a clarity that didn't come from strength, but from acceptance. He understood that he didn't need to be unbeatable nor strong all the time. That being human is about feeling, failing, getting up and trying again. That scars can be maps, not chains. And that there is power in admitting vulnerability. A power capable of transforming not only one's own life, but also the lives of those who cross our path. Over time, he regained confidence in his own voice. He rediscovered himself in small joys. He allowed the world to get closer again. And he realized that what he had lived through, however devastating it had been, opened unexpected doors to real connections, sincere relationships, and moments he would never have valued before. Pain shaped him, yes, but it didn't imprison him. It transformed into language, into purpose, into something that could be shared with dignity. And when he finally understood this, the weight he carried lessened. It didn't disappear, but settled into a lighter, more conscious place. He looked in the mirror and for a rare moment saw peace. A peace that said, "You did what you needed to do. You lived what you needed to live. And now you can move on." The soldier who once believed himself to be in ruins didn't rebuild himself by returning to who he was, but by reinventing himself into who he could become. He renamed his pain. He renamed his story. He renamed himself. And, in this silent reinvention, he found what he had been searching for so long. A meaning that wasn't outside, but always within him, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that is why, at the end of this journey, a truth remains that resonates with anyone who has faced their own inner deserts. Sometimes what saves us is not strength. It is presence of someone, of a gesture, of a memory, or of something within us that finally awakens and says, "I am here, and I will continue." If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. I choose to follow.